Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Suraj Pancha. This time I'll be dealing with the topic antipsychotic agents. Before going into the antipsychotic agents proper, uh, in today's session, I'll be dealing with mostly the anatomy of a dopaminergic pathway and the physiology of dopaminergic neurotransmission, and as well as the nature of psychosis and schizophrenia as a prototypic disorder. Okay, let's not waste the time and dive into the ocean of schizophrenia. So before that, let me start with mostly the anatomy and the physiology. Now, this is how I will be starting with initially the dopaminergic neurotransmission, the dopamine metabolism, dopamine receptor types, the importance of central dopaminergic pathway and its relevance to schizophrenia and antipsychotic agents, schizophrenia as a prototypic psychotic disorder, neural network of psychosis. Of course, the classical dopamine hypothesis, we know the serotonin hypothesis, and the most recent development, that is glutamate hypothesis, which explains the psychosis in some patients of schizophrenia, and later on the summarizing the part. Okay, coming on first to the dopaminergic neurotransmission. The source for all the catecholamines for that matter is a neutral amino acid, the tyrosine, including the dopamine. We know that tyrosine is mostly obtained from a source, diet. However, it can also be obtained from liver, that is from amino acid phenylalanine. The first step in the formation of dopamine is the conversion of tyrosine to levodopa. However, it requires an enzyme known as tyrosine hydroxylase. And this conversion from tyrosine to L-dopa is a rate limiting step. However, the tyrosine hydroxylase is an iron containing enzyme and it requires a cofactor known as tetrahydrobiopterin. And the final step in the formation of dopamine is the conversion of L-dopa to dopamine. And the enzyme which is required for this conversion is known as aromatic amino acid decarboxylase, or also known as dopa decarboxylase. However, it requires a cofactor as well, that is pyridoxal phosphate. Now, the dopamine which is synthesized in the cytosol of a dopaminergic neuron enters into the vesicle with the help of two pumps. The first pump is known as proton ATPase pump. Proton ATPase pump. And the function of this pump is to pump the proton from the cytosol into the vesicle. Now, this creates an electrochemical gradient across the membrane, vesicle membrane. And because of the movement of the H plus ions, that is proton into the vesicle, it creates more of electropositivity inside the vesicle. Now, this positivity within the vesicle creates a drive for the movement of dopamine into the vesicle for its storage. Okay, of course, with the exchange of H plus ion which are present excessively within the vesicle. Now, for this to happen, it requires one more transporter which is known as vesicle monoamine transporter. Now, once the action potential reaches to the dopaminergic neuron, there is a opening of calcium pump which makes it to enter into the cytoplasm, which is necessary for the vesicle to get attached with the plasma membrane. Now, this binding of vesicle along with the membrane of presynaptic dopaminergic neurons causes exocytosis of the dopamine into the synaptic cleft. However, the fate of the dopamine which is released in the synaptic cleft may be a postsynaptic binding to the dopamine receptors, or it may bind to the dopamine autoreceptors, or the another fate, it can reuptake into the presynaptic terminal, of course with the help of a transporter known as dopamine transporter. But for the entry of dopamine into the presynaptic terminal, it requires an energy, that is from the sodium acts as a source of energy for the entry of dopamine into the presynaptic terminal. The other fate of dopamine, once it enters into the presynaptic, that is into the cytoplasm, it can either get metabolized by an enzyme known as monoamine oxidase, or it can once again re-enter into the vesicle with the help of vesicular monoamine transporter. Now coming on to the dopamine metabolism, the dopamine gets metabolized in the presence of monoamine oxidase or aldehyde dehydrogenase to a metabolite known as dihydroxyphenyl acetic acid, also known as DOPAC. And once again, it can be converted in the presence of an enzyme known as COMT, that is catecholamine methyl transferase, to the homovanillic acid, which is the most stable metabolite and which is excreted in the urine. However, the dopamine can also be converted in the presence of catecholamine methyl transferase to the metabolite, that is 3-methoxytyramine, and further in the presence of MAHO or aldehyde dehydrogenase can be converted into homovanillic acid. Now coming on to the importance of monoamine oxidase and its location and its substrate. Monoamine oxidase, it is located on the outer surface of the mitochondria, and it has two isoforms, that is MAHO-A and MAHO-B, that is monoamine oxidase A and monoamine oxidase B. Let us see this location. The peripheral location of the MAHO-A is present on the term placenta. To be more precise, they are present on the syncytotrophoblast layer of the term placenta. They are present on the gut and liver. And in the brain, they are present in all the regions containing catecholamines, and its highest abundance is seen in locus coeruleus. However, MAHO-B is present in the periphery, that is on platelets, lymphocytes, liver, and osteocytes around the blood vessels. And in central, that is in brain, it is primarily present in the regions that synthesize and store 5-hydroxytryptamine. And it is also prominent at the nucleus raphe, dorsalis, posterior hypothalamus. Now, if you see the substrate for the MAHO-A, the primary substrate being non-epinephrine, epinephrine, and the 5-hydroxytryptamine. But let's see the importance of MAHO-B. Though some of the catecholamines may overlap with the as a substrate for the MAHO enzymes, but however, in case of MAHO-B, dopamine is more rapidly degraded than 5-hydroxytryptamine and the non-epinephrine. Now, if you see the importance of MAHO-A and MAHO-B, there are some drugs which selectively targets MAHO-A. And one of the example for that is moclobemide, which is known as reversible inhibitor of monoamine oxidase A type. So this is mostly used as an antidepressant, and the irreversible inhibitor of MAHO-B enzyme, the drug is selegiline, which is used in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. However, the non-selective inhibitors of MAHO-A and MAHO-B are also present clinically, and which acts irreversibly by inhibiting these two enzymes are phenelzine and phenylcypromine. Now coming to the importance of catecholamine methyl transferase, its location, it is mostly present in cytoplasm or cytosol, except in chromaffin cells of adrenal medulla. They are mostly as membrane bond form, and this membrane bond form of catecholamine methyl transferase has higher affinity for the catecholamines. They are also present as soluble form, mostly in the peripheral tissues like liver and kidney, and in kidney it is mostly present in the proximal tubular epithelial cells. In the central, that is in the brain, they are present in postsynaptic neurons and in glial cells. Now the substrates for the catecholamine methyl transferase are endogenous catecholamines and their hydroxylated metabolites, and synthetic drugs like levodopa. Now, if you see the importance of catecholamine methyl transferase, it can be targeted. That is the inhibitors of COMT like entacapone, which inhibits the peripheral catecholamine methyl transferase. They are used in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And those that inhibit both the central and the peripheral catecholamine methyl transferase, the drug available is tolcapone, once again, which is used in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. Now coming on to the dopamine receptor types, it is basically divided into two types, that is dopamine 1 receptor family and dopamine 2 receptor family. The receptors which are included in dopamine 1 receptor family are D1 and D5 type, and in D2 receptor family they are D2, D3 and D4 type. Coming on to the location of each type, if you compare the D1 and D2 type, they have a similar location. See in the below picture, the dopamine 1 and dopamine 2, they are present on caudate and putamen, amygdala, then olfactory tubercle, hippocampus. Apart from this, the dopamine receptors, they have a larger presence in substantia nigra and on anterior pituitary, that is on the lactotropes. Now D5, they are present on the hippocampus and hypothalamus, and D3, they are present on the frontal cortex, medulla and midbrain, and D4, they are abundantly present on the cerebral cortex. Now if you see the secondary messenger system, they mostly act via the GS type, that is the D1 receptor family. They mostly act via GS, that is stimulatory subtype. This stimulates the adenyl cyclase enzyme and increases the cyclic AMP. The other mechanism by which it acts or amplifies the signal is by PIP2 hydrolysis, that is phosphatidyl inositol 4,5 bisphosphate. Now, once it also, after the hydrolysis, it forms the IP3, that is inositol triphosphate. The role of inositol triphosphate is to increase the calcium mobilization from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the other mechanism being protein kinase C activation. However, the D2 receptor family, they are mostly GI, that is inhibitory type of receptor, thereby inhibiting the adenyl cyclase and decreasing the cyclic AMP, and also decreases the voltage gated calcium currents. The other mechanism by which they act is increasing the potassium currents. So therefore, overall, the D1 type of receptor family, they are GS type, and D2 receptor family, they are GI or inhibitory type of receptors. Now coming on to the central dopaminergic pathway and its relevance to antipsychotic agents. If you remember from the physiology, if you can remember the most important one which deals with the antipsychotics or the schizophrenia in proper, that is a mesolimbic pathway. This mesolimbic pathway, anatomically, it projects the dopaminergic neurons from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens. And this importance is, the importance of this mesolimbic pathways, it is seen that there is an excessive mesolimbic activity in the schizophrenic patients, which is responsible for the positive symptoms. Coming on to the next pathway, that is nigrostriatal pathway. The dopaminergic neurons, they project from the substantia nigra to the striatum, that is to the caudate and the putamen. And this important physiological role of nigrostriatal pathway is to control the motor activity. Now, what happens when you use antipsychotic agents? It may even block the dopamine receptors which are present on the nigrostriatal pathway and responsible for extrapyramidal symptoms, and upon long-term administration are responsible for the tardive dyskinesias. Coming on to the next important dopaminergic pathway, that is tubuloinfundibular pathway. Here it projects the dopaminergic neurons from the hypothalamus to the median eminence, that is on the anterior pituitary, that is on the lactotropes. Normally, the dopamine which is released into the portal circulation from the hypothalamus, they normally tonically inhibits the release of prolactin from the lactotropes. So what happens in case of antipsychotic agents which are used in the treatment of schizophrenia? They even block the dopamine receptor which are present on the tubuloinfundibular pathway, thereby increasing the level of prolactin, which is known as hyperprolactinemia. Coming on to the other important pathway, that is mesocortical pathway. This mesocortical pathway, it projects once again from the ventral tegmental area to the prefrontal cortex. And it's been seen that there is a decreased mesocortical pathway activity in the schizophrenia patient, and which is responsible for the negative symptoms. So coming on to the one by one to the importance of knowing the central dopaminergic pathway, coming to the first mesolimbic pathway and its relevance to schizophrenia. Now coming on to the anatomical basis, which we already dealt, that the dopaminergic neurons in the mesolimbic pathway, they project from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens. And the physiological importance of the basis of this mesolimbic pathway is it has something to do with the emotions, reward phenomenon, motivations, and responsible for the positive symptoms of the schizophrenia. With this basis, the pharmacological basis for the use of typical antipsychotics is the typical antipsychotics, they act by blocking the D2 receptors and thereby reduces the excessive dopaminergic activity in the mesolimbic and thereby reducing the positive symptoms of the schizophrenia. So this is the pharmacological basis by which the typical antipsychotics are used in the treatment of schizophrenia. Coming on to the nigrostriatal pathway and its relevance to antipsychotic agents. First, coming to its anatomical basis, the dopaminergic neuron pathway, here it projects from the substantia nigra, that is pars compacta, to the striatum, that is to the caudate and the putamen. Now you already know the physiological basis or the physiological role of nigrostriatal pathway is to regulate or control the purposeful movements or the motor activity. Now if you see in relation to the pharmacology or pharmacological basis, that whenever the typical antipsychotics which prominently blocks the dopamine receptors, it induces the extrapyramidal symptoms, or when they are used in long term, they even may be responsible for causing tardive dyskinesias. Coming on to the other important central dopaminergic pathway, that is tubuloinfundibular pathway and its relevance to antipsychotic agents. Coming first to its anatomical basis, it projects from the hypothalamus to the infundibular region, that is to the median eminence. And the physiological basis is the dopamine which is released into the portal circulation connects the median eminence with the anterior pituitary. And if you see physiologically, the dopamine released, it tonically inhibits the prolactin release by acting upon the lactotropes. And the pharmacological basis of drugs which are used as in typical antipsychotics, that is which blocks or which have a higher affinity for the D2 receptors, by antagonizing at this level, they can inhibit the influence of this dopamine on the prolactin, thereby increasing the level of prolactin, which may not be required as an antipsychotics in the schizophrenia and which is responsible for the side effects, for example, galactorrhea in women and impotence in case of men. Coming on to the mesocortical pathway and its relevance to schizophrenia. The anatomical importance, it projects from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens and the frontal cortex, and the physiological basis is it have a role in the cognition. And it's been seen that there is a decreased mesocortical pathway activity in the schizophrenia, which is responsible for the negative symptoms and the cognitive impairment. So therefore, if you see the atypical antipsychotics which acts upon the mesocortical pathway may have a role in the treatment of negative symptoms and to some extent even in the cognitive impairment. Coming on to the another important area, that is area postrema and its relevance. The anatomical basis is it is located in the floor of the fourth ventricle, and the importance of this is they have a very high density of the dopaminergic receptor, that is D2 receptor. And the physiological basis is it acts as a center or a stimulation of this D2 receptor activates the vomiting centers of the brain. And it's been seen that the typical antipsychotics which acts by blocking the D2 receptors may have a role in the treatment of nausea and vomiting. So they may protect from the nausea and vomiting in some of the drug-induced nausea and vomiting like apomorphine, which acts upon the D2 central D2 agonist, and in cases of cancer chemotherapy induced nausea and vomiting, that is in low risk of emesis, they may have a role particularly the drug used is chlorchlorperazine. Okay, that's a first generation antipsychotics, of course, in combination with some other drug. And of course, it's not a first line drug, but however, may have a role in the treatment of cancer chemotherapy induced nausea and vomiting in low risk of emesis. Coming on next to the nature of psychosis and the schizophrenia, we know that psychosis is a symptom of mental illness which is characterized by distorted or the non-existent sense of reality, in a way that it is associated with the delusions or hallucinations or disorganized thinking. Now, if you consider psychotic disorders, there are many different etiologies. For example, in the last session, which I engaged on corticosteroids, we have seen that steroids upon long-term administration can cause psychosis. The other psychosis which may be involved are in case of Cushing's disease, Parkinson's disease psychosis, wherein a Lewy body associated, it is associated with the loss of serotonin raphe neurons, and this is responsible for increased cortical 5-HT2A activity. So this may be responsible for the psychosis in Parkinson's disease and dementia with psychosis, because of decreased muscarinic cholinergic neurotransmission. So therefore, the Alzheimer's disease may be associated with the psychosis. So there are other different psychosis, etiologies like nutritional deficiency in the form of thiamine deficiency. The worst form of thiamine deficiency may end up in Korsakoff psychosis, and then postmortem psychosis. So there are different etiologies for the psychotic disorders, and of course, because of the different etiologies, each demands a unique treatment approach. So therefore, if you see into the unique treatment approach, we do use typical antipsychotics or some atypical antipsychotics targeting the dopamine receptors and the serotonin receptors in the treatment of schizophrenia. In case of Parkinson's disease psychosis, once again, because of increased cortical 5-HT2A activity, we use an inverse agonist of 5-HT2A, that is pimavanserin, that is PIMAVANSERIN. Pimavanserin is a drug used in Parkinson's disease psychosis. Like in case of dementia with psychosis, of course, a limited role of antipsychotics. Those antipsychotics with limited antimuscarinic activity may be used in the treatment of dementia with psychosis. Like supplement of the thiamine may improve the Korsakoff psychosis. So this is how each psychosis may demand a unique treatment approach. Then coming on to the few common psychotic disorders, schizophrenia is the most common entity, psychotic disorder. And we know that it is characterized by the loss of contact with the reality, and it's a chronic disorder, and it begins in the late adolescence or the early adulthood. Delusion disorder, it is one of the type of psychotic disorder, and the predominant symptom in delusional disorder is a persistent delusion, that is a false belief. A schizoaffective disorder, it is also a type of a psychotic disorder. Here there is a failure to fit either in the schizophrenia or the affective disorder. The other form can be schizophreniform disorder. It is also a type of psychotic disorder. However, it is similar to that of schizophrenia, except here the duration of prodromal or the acute and residual symptom is longer than 1 month, but however lesser than 6 months when compared to schizophrenia prototype. Another type can be a brief psychotic disorder. The name itself suggests brief. Here, the psychotic symptoms last for the less than 1 month, and it is mostly attributed to the psychological stress. However, all these 5 types, they are attributed to one common form, that is known as schizophrenia spectrum disorders. However, there can be other type of psychotic disorders like mood disorders associated with psychotic features, substance induced psychosis. Few examples which you must have encountered, like psychostimulants in the form of cocaine and amphetamine, which acts as a dopamine receptor agonist, can cause psychosis. One of the anesthetic, that is a dissociative anesthetic, ketamine, which acts as an NMDA receptor antagonist, can be a substance induced psychosis. And then psychedelics in the form of LSDs, which acts as an 5-HT2A stimulants, can also be responsible for psychosis. These are the various examples for the substance induced psychosis, of course, with the different receptor activity. Another example can be a dementia, that is Alzheimer's disease, or and Alzheimer's dementia associated with psychotic features. So these are the few common psychotic disorders. Delirium, psychotic features as well. Now coming on to this schizophrenia as a prototypic disorder. It is a heterogeneous syndrome which is characterized by the disturbances or the perturbations of language, perception, thinking, social activity, affect, and motivation, that is volition. However, considering all this presentation as syndrome, there is no single pathognomic features which says that a person is suffering from the schizophrenia. It begins in late adolescence and mostly it has insidious onset. However, a very less common, it can have acute in onset. Now, coming on to the symptoms, it is mostly characterized by the positive symptoms. Some patients have cognitive deficit and negative symptoms. However, it may overlap all this presentation. Coming on to the positive symptoms, they are mostly manifest in the form of hallucination, the predominant being auditory. I repeat, it is auditory hallucination. Delusions, once again, I repeat, the prominent one is paranoid and can be a disorganized speech. And the pathophysiology involved in the positive symptoms, they are attributed to the increased D2 activity in the mesolimbic pathway or the region. Okay, and for the negative symptoms, it is presented as anhedonia, that is loss of interest and pleasure, alogia, that is decreased speech, and avolition, that is decrease in the motivation. And the pathophysiology behind the negative symptoms in the prototypic psychosis, that is schizophrenia, is attributed to decreased dopamine activity or dopaminergic activity in the mesocortical symptoms. Okay, so there are some patients, or in fact many patients, they may be associated with the cognitive deficits as well. Now coming on to the epidemiology and the pathophysiology. Of course, it is a multifactorial in nature. Some of the factors which may be susceptible or more prone for developing this schizophrenia attributable are the genetic susceptibility, some in the form of environmental and early developmental insults, and there are some hypotheses that is on the neurotransmitter which will explain the pathophysiology of the schizophrenia. Let's coming on to the first, the genetic susceptibility. Now it's been seen that in the first degree relatives of a proband, it has 6.6% chances of developing or susceptibility of developing the schizophrenia. If both the parents are affected, the offspring may have the chances or the susceptibility of 40% to develop schizophrenia. And in case of monozygotic twins, there is a 50% chances. And in case of dizygotic twins, there are 10% chances or susceptibility to develop a schizophrenia. However, we cannot attribute to a single gene. There are multiple genes which are involved here. Now coming on to the environmental and the early developmental insults. Coming on to the environmental proper, if you see the environmental exposures such as fetus exposing during the second trimester during some sort of infections and nutritional insults may be a cause for schizophrenia, and some in the form of substance abuse in the late teens or early adults, like we have seen some of the psychostimulants or psychedelics when used in the early adults years or in late teens may be a cause as an environmental for the development of schizophrenia. Now, coming on to the early developmental insults, it implies that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, which implies there is some sort of structural and the functional changes in the brain that are present in utero in some patient, or that may develop during the childhood or during the adolescence or both. So this is what some fetus may get exposed to these changes, structural and functional, as early as in utero, so later on presenting in adulthood as a schizophrenia. The other being a neurotransmitter hypothesis, of course the classical one, which are age old one, that is dopamine hypothesis, serotonin hypothesis, and the most recent development in the hypothesis is the glutamate hypothesis. Let us see the very first one, the classical type of the classical dopamine hypothesis, which will explain the psychosis. Now it says that the dopamine hypothesis of psychosis, wherein for half a century the psychosis, particularly the auditory hallucinations and the paranoid delusions, have been thought to be a result of or the hyperactivation of the dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway. And this mesolimbic pathway projects from the ventral tegmental area to the ventral striatum. So because of the excessive activity of, once again, the ventral striatum, they are responsible for causing the auditory hallucinations and the paranoid delusions. But however, the dorsal striatum, okay, let us see, the dorsal striatum, which is very adjacent to the ventral striatum, is not thought to be affected by this hyperactivity, because this dorsal striatum is innervated via the nigrostriatal pathway from the substantia nigra, and which is normally responsible for controlling the motor movements. Now, if you see the importance that whenever we use a typical antipsychotic, that is, which has a higher affinity for D2 receptors, by blocking the D2 receptors, it may control the positive symptoms of the schizophrenia, that is the auditory hallucination and paranoid delusion. But however, there is a price of doing business with the D2 receptors, that is blocking the D2 receptors on the ventral striatum. That is, it can also block the D2 receptors which are present on the nigrostriatal pathway, which are projecting from the substantia nigra. Okay, so what happens whenever there is a blockade of D2 receptors on the nigrostriatal pathway? Now, this may cause the movement disorders such as akathisia, drug-induced Parkinsonism, and long-term tardive dyskinesias. Now, let us see some theoretical lines on this classical hypothesis. Now, let us see the basis for the psychosis. As I said, like, it is because of the excessive limbic dopaminergic activity, and this dopamine hypothesis, it is highly relevant to understand the basis of positive and the negative symptoms. And the evidence which are suggestive for the dopamine hypothesis are, it's been seen that antipsychotic drugs, they strongly block the postsynaptic D2 receptors, thereby decreasing the positive symptoms, and they may also act upon the striatal frontal system. The second evidence in the favor of this hypothesis is drugs that increases the dopaminergic activity, that is a L-DOPA, that is a precursor form of dopamine, amphetamine, and the bromocriptine, that is a dopamine 2 receptor agonist. They either aggravate the schizophrenia psychosis or produce psychosis de novo in some patients, therefore explaining the dopamine hypothesis of psychosis. The third evidence, a dopamine receptor density has been found to be increased in number in postmortem patients in the brain of schizophrenics who have not been treated with the antipsychotic drugs. And it's been also seen that some, but not all, the postmortem studies of schizophrenic subjects have reported to have increased dopamine level as well as dopamine receptor density in the areas like nucleus accumbens, caudate, and the putamen. The other basis being the cognitive impairment and the negative symptoms. It's been observed that there is a diminished cortical or the hippocampal dopaminergic activity, which is responsible for the negative symptoms and the cognitive impairment. If you look overall, that this theory, though it is suggestive of the psychosis in the schizophrenia, but it's been also seen that all the psychosis is not only because of the dopamine. Now, for example, if you see in case of Parkinson's disease psychosis, because of the 5-HT2A activity, it has resulted in the psychosis. So therefore, other examples being some of the substances induced psychosis may have a different etiologies, and some in the form of NMDA receptor antagonist like ketamine may also develop psychosis, but the basis is different. So therefore, the dopamine may not explain all type of psychosis. Hence, it is no longer considered adequate for explaining all the symptoms of the or all the presentation of the schizophrenia. However, it is still a widely used hypothesis or accepted hypothesis for the explanation of psychosis in schizophrenia. Let us think behind the dopamine hypothesis, as I said, just by giving an example of other psychosis, the involvement of the serotonin. Let us see how it is. Now, it's been stated that the psychosis can also be the result of hyperactivation of the 5-HT2A receptors on the glutaminergic neurons. And this hyperactivation due to excess serotonin or because of upregulated 5-HT2A receptor, it causes increased activity of a downstream glutamate signaling on the ventral tegmental area. So therefore, it releases the glutamate at the level of ventral tegmental area, which may activate the mesolimbic dopaminergic pathway, which can result in excess in dopamine in the ventral striatum, which is responsible for developing the auditory hallucination and paranoid delusions. So in summary, that is the upregulated 5-HT2 activity on the glutaminergic neurons releases the excess of glutamate on the ventral tegmental area, which stimulates to mesolimbic and the ventral striatum, which is responsible for the auditory and the paranoid delusions. Now let us see some of the basis for the hallucinatory effects. Now it's been observed that 5-HT2A in particular stimulation is the basis for the psychosis, and even to some extent even 5-HT2C stimulation can also be a cause for psychosis. The 5-HT2A receptor blockade, they have a key factor, that is, this plays a key factor in the mechanism of action of the atypical antipsychotics, therefore explaining the importance of treating the negative symptoms in the schizophrenia. It's been also observed that the inverse agonist of 5-HT2A receptor, they blocks the constitutive activity of this receptor, thereby increasing the dopamine level in the mesocortical and thereby increasing or helping in the treatment of negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Some of the drugs which targets the 5-HT2 receptors are clozapine, which is a prototype atypical antipsychotics. Other example being risperidone, zotipine, olanzapine, quetiapine, ziprasidone, aripiprazole, celtindol, paliperidone, acinapine, and lurasidone. Now coming on to the most recent development in the hypothesis of psychosis, that is a glutamate hypothesis of psychosis. So it says that the schizophrenia may be the result of hypofunctional NMDA receptors upon the GABA interneurons in the cerebral cortex. Now, this hypofunction may lead to overactivation of the downstream glutamate signaling, that is downstream, that is the glutamate signaling to an area that is ventral tegmental area. So upon excessive stimulation of the ventral tegmental area by the glutamate, it also activates the dopaminergic pathway of the mesolimbic, which go on stimulate to the ventral striatum, which is responsible for producing or presenting as a auditory hallucination and the paranoid delusions. So therefore, in a whole, if you see, it is the hypofunctional NMDA receptors on the GABA interneurons on the cerebral cortex is responsible for the overactivation of the glutamate signal, which goes on stimulates the ventral tegmental area and thereby causing the auditory hallucination and the paranoid delusions. Now, however, this is the most recent hypothesis which will try to explain the psychosis of schizophrenia. Now, if you see, the future can be those which can acts or improves the activity of NMDA receptor may be a potential target for the treatment of psychosis. Now, coming on to the DSM-5 criteria, that is the latest guideline for the diagnosing schizophrenic patients. It says that 2 or more of the following each present for a significant portion of time during a 1 month period. That is, at least one of these must be delusions. 2, that is hallucination or disorganized speech, and the other presentation can be in the form of grossly disorganized or the catatonic behavior and negative symptoms. The other criteria being for a significant portion of the times since the time of disturbances, the level of functioning in one or major areas in a way that the major areas in the way of work, interpersonal relations, or the self-care for that matter should be markedly below the level achieved prior to the onset. So which to say it as a criteria for the diagnosing schizophrenia. The other criteria being there should be a continuous signs of disturbances which persist for at least 6 months. And during this 6 months period, it must include at least 1 month of symptoms. Coming to the other criteria, the schizoaffective disorder and the depressive or the bipolar disorder with the psychotic feature should be ruled out for diagnosing the schizophrenia. And other exclusion should be the disturbances shouldn't be attributable to the physiological effects of a substances which we discussed earlier, that is a drug of abuse like in the form of psychostimulants or psychedelics or any other medical condition, sorry. If there is a history of autism spectrum disorder, now there lies an importance features like additional diagnosis of schizophrenia is made only if the prominent delusions or hallucinations are present, in addition to other required symptoms of the schizophrenia should be present for at least 1 month. Now this is the recent criteria for diagnosing the schizophrenia, that is DSM-5 as per the American Psychiatrist Association. Now coming on to the summary, we have seen that the schizophrenia is multifactorial in nature. Therefore, we have seen the genetic susceptibility, environmental role, then the neurodevelopmental problem that happens in some of the structural and functional areas of brain, then the neurotransmitter, which will try to explain the nature of psychosis. Then it's been also seen that the three pathways, those are interconnected, which theoretically explains or linked to the hallucination and the delusions. Those are dopamine hyperactivity in the mesolimbic pathway and hypofunctional NMDA receptors at the level of GABAergic interneurons in the cerebral cortex, and the excessive serotonin activity, in particular 5-HT2 receptors on the glutamate neurons in the cerebral cortex, which will try to explain the majority of the presentation in the schizophrenia. Thank you. These are my references. Thank you and all the best.